coming up.
So is it the intent that the IRAP governance structure, where nothing is transparent to the public or accountable to Parliament, is what will be what this will evolve into?
But money is being channeled right now by one board chair and 3 board members and the current SDTC organization, because no one was fired.
You have an interim board right now at the Green Slush Fund that is making decisions about where these disbursements go. Do any members of the current interim board have personal investments in companies that have received money, that could receive money in the future, that are seeking money? Do any current members of that interim board have those kinds of investments?
Looks to me like the new SDTC is pretty much like the old SDTC, because it's being governed by a group of acting people. It'll be given to you, and then it'll be flipped out to another group. So you're an agency in the middle to another government agency with no assurance that it's going to have transparency, or that the 82%, the Auditor General reviewed 226 projects, 186 were conflicted.
It's not my question.
It's for the department to give an account on their work.
Sir, it's my time. Thank you. You are not able to educate Canadians as to what the minister meant by saying he's going to provide enhanced oversight and monitoring of funding. You're not speaking with him, so you don't know what he means by that, do you?
I want to ask about bonuses. Have bonuses been paid to executives, directors, managers that have been working on this Green Slush Fund? Are people that are working on this receiving bonuses?
So NRC had a scandal in the Chrétien government where employees were taking kickbacks on grants, and NRC had to get that money back. So you do have experience, or the NRC does have experience of trying to recover inappropriate money.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
This is from the National Research Council of Canada. Mitch Davies, President. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming in. And David Lisk, Vice President, Industrial Research Assistant Program. Nice to see you as well. Mr. Perkins, you will lead us off, please, for 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses. I just say on a personal note, last night at 10:30 was the 26th anniversary of the tragedy of Swissair flight downing and crash in my riding up near Peggy's Cove, where over 200 individuals died, and it's still a trauma for many people in the riding. I'd just like to acknowledge that, and all the people in my riding that are still suffering from that, and the families who lost loved ones. In your opening, you mentioned that the SDTC announcement, otherwise known from our side as the Green Slush Fund, was announced on June 4th, basically within hours of the release of the Auditor General's report on the Green Slush Fund, conflicts of interest, and misuse of taxpayer money. Was the minister or the minister's office, the Minister of Industry, minister's office, and or the deputy minister in touch with NRC before that announcement for this transfer?
Mr. Chair, the NRC would have been involved at a working level in terms of options that I assume the department was considering for SDTC sometime in the spring of that year. And so, yes, we had interaction with the department officials on the announcement. Obviously, we had to think about it from a planning point of view and prepare ourselves for the day it was announced and get on with the transition that was planned.
So before the Auditor General's results were out, the minister was talking about the transition to you. Did the minister or his staff meet in that preparation with your department?
So, Mr. Chair, the advice or interaction with the minister on the file didn't involve myself or any of the staff at the NRC. So we would work through the department on any material they were looking for from us in regards to the consideration of that. Options that may well have been considered or advice given. We didn't have any visibility to that directly. It's not our role to advise. Obviously, we're there to support the portfolio and the minister. If they assign us a job and want to assess it, then we can help them undertake that work.
And were there any meetings with the Prime Minister's office or the Privy Council office in that preparation?
So I can't speak to any meetings that I'm aware of that I was involved with or any staff that I'm aware of directly with the Prime Minister's office in regard to the transition. I can assume because matters that relate to the way government's organized, there could have been working level contacts on, like we call machinery business, looking at options that could be considered. But again, that's something that I wasn't involved in directly.
My understanding, I think from your presentation and the releases, this is being wrapped into the IRAP structure, governance structure within the NRC, at least for the next year, with an acting board of 3 former public servants, I believe. Do they all report to you, Mr. Lisk?
So,
Because you have a governance structure for IRAP that reports to you, am I correct?
so currently, SDTC has its own structure, and it has the board members that you're talking about. We have our own operating structure as IRAP, which lives inside of the NRC. When the transition happens, the SDTC structure will be collapsed eventually, and IRAP will take over operations of the program, and also all of the staff will come to implement those operations. And so to answer your question, we do not have a relationship with SDTC in the way you're describing. The board
does not.
The board
It's
does.
still operating independently under those 3 acting board members.
That is correct.
Are you working with management, I presume, and the acting CEO on the transfer?
Yeah. Mr. Chair, just to be absolutely clear, because I appreciate the question that's being asked. So the interim board does not report to NRC in any manner. We work with the interim board representing the foundation. We work with the staff at SDTC on the transition planning. But the interim board will, again, wind up its activities when the foundation's wound up, and then once we've taken over the program, there's no ongoing relationship between us and the interim board.
Well,
And they
that'll
don't report to us. They're not going to become part of our reporting structure. The foundation won't exist as far as the ongoing programming is concerned.
And the governance of all of that will exist sort of the way IRAP is done now, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So when I look at the IRAP governance structure, I see very little accountability to Parliament. In fact, I see none. That IRAP board is not governor and council appointed. It's appointed by the members of NRC. I presume when I read it, it's under Mr. Lisk. He has the responsibility for appointing the board members. And there is no publicly available information that I can see in disclosures of where that money goes on those individual donations. When I go to the SDTC site, I can see everything they've done since their inception. So is it the intent that the IRAP governance structure, where nothing is transparent to the public or accountable to Parliament, is what will be what this will evolve into?
So, Mr. Chair, by delivering the program through NRC IRAP, all of the transparency and disclosure requirements that apply to any federal organization will apply, which means funding will be proactively disclosed as it is. The Financial Administration Act will apply. Decisions will be made by the employees of the organization, in this case, as they've been made in NRC IRAP since its inception. So they're made by professionals, they're made by public servants.
Thank you. That is your time, Mr. Perkins. Thank you, Mr. Davies. Turning now to our next member, Mr. Weiler, you have the floor.
I want to pick up a little bit on where Mr. Perkins was going with his questioning, and this will be very helpful for us. So in June, when the minister announced that SDTC was going to be transitioned under the NRC, I think it would be really helpful for us to learn about what's going to be different and what to expect. So would SDTC still be classified as an arm's length organization, or does this transition under the NRC, which is a Government of Canada organization, change that?
So, Mr. Chair, subsequent to the transition, there will no longer be an arm's length organization that's in charge of the funding. That's going to be transferred to us, and then we'll be delivering for sustainable development technology development purposes and helping entrepreneurs. And the accountability and the structure that will exist will be the same that applies to a departmental corporation as we have it now with the NRC IRAP and all the financial administration, all the sort of public administration frameworks that are an application for departments that are common in our system, into audit committees, public disclosure, the financial administration of funds in the public service. All that will apply, and there'll be no arm's length body involved.
Thank you. And would you say that SDTC's mission aligns with that of the NRC? And in short, would you say this transition would then make sense to you?
Mr. Chair, supporting innovators, supporting entrepreneurs is most certainly within our mandate and mission. NRC IRAP has been doing that directly with small, medium-sized businesses for over 75 years, and quite successfully so, based on testimonials and things that Canadians have observed about the program and its strengths. Also, at this level of our strategic plan, climate and sustainability is a goal, a priority for the National Research Council in the next 5 years for our new strategic plan. So we see that as being aligned with our goals, our capabilities, the interests we have to support Canada with science and technology that's there for our future to help our growth and also respond to the challenges that Canada faces.
How can we ensure that we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater when we have numerous projects that should exist and many companies depend upon this fund for their existence? There's an example of a company that was waiting for their second $100,000 payment that they should have got last March but didn't get it. They had to lay off 4 employees. Clients have lost trust in the company. There's a lack of competitiveness now, and so there are many companies that aren't doing well because of the greed of certain members of the board. And so how is the NRC going to manage this so that these companies receive their funding as soon as possible? I know that these projects are being assessed, but can we have some clear information? Because we need to be able to predict what's going to happen when we're waiting for money from the government. It's supposed to be very reliable funding. Because, yes, they're in the private sector, but they're waiting up on public funding. So what can they say to their teams, their clients, in order to have a certain amount of predictability? Do you have an idea of when these companies will receive the money that they're owed?
The question, and it's important, and I mentioned it in our opening comments, that stability and predictability for the stakeholders, the companies that work with SDTC is very important. Obviously, we want to see the transition concluded within a year, and we are hoping to do it earlier than that. The question of the funding that a given company might well be waiting for now, I think that's obviously important, and it's with the SDTC organization and the interim board. They have to examine, they're spoken here about they're reviewing the files, given that questions and observations have been raised in terms of eligibility in some cases and so on. So they have to complete that work, and so the restart work is not undertaken at the NRC at this time. We will take on the files once that is done. Files that are valid, that conform to the contribution agreement, those are the files that will be transferred to us. So I think it's important. The member's question is very well understood in terms of needing to get this going, and for the companies that are waiting, the real need for them from a business point of view. But the restart is not something NRC is directly involved when it's with the SDTC and its board and staff.
In your work towards restoring public confidence, I think it's important to take into account the victims of this. And to one of my former colleagues who mentioned this already earlier, it is important that we try to balance what is obviously a really good policy, but recognize a really strong and very well evidenced situation of misconduct, particularly conflict of interest, organizational mismanagement, and even employee and serious HR concerns that were brought forward earlier at the Ethics Committee last year. When it comes to, for example, some of those persons in the work of restoring public confidence, of course, taxpayers need to know that funds are properly being administered, as one of the victims in this case, to ensure that they themselves have confidence that the work that you're undertaking is going to ensure that taxpayers do get true value. Second to that, of course, we have the employees. I mentioned that whistleblowers who had to eventually come forward to a House of Commons committee to make relevant their very serious HR complaints and concerns of what they had witnessed. We had also heard from that time that HR managers were being fired left, right, and center. There was huge issues of HR where employees ultimately had to leave. In addition to that, lastly, it's our environment that takes, I think, a very large impact from the lack of, or at least the disablement of this program. And I think many young Canadians in particular are hoping to see that the work you do to rebuild the confidence in this kind of work is actually restored. So just speaking directly to the work of restoring public confidence, can you speak to how, what processes that you've undertaken in response to the Auditor General's report, particularly her recommendations she makes throughout Section 6? There's very many recommendations, but have you taken into account the Auditor General's recommendations and your work to restore public confidence in this work?
So, Mr. Chair, yes, I would say I think it's really important that people take into account the observations that have been made, reports also the Commissioner of Ethics on the question. Those things have been distributed at the Council, and certainly we'll be discussing them further as the days go ahead. And I think NRC IRAP, for what it's done for 75 years, can only continue to do it if it does it well and to a high standard. And we take that seriously because these programs are important. They're important for our economy to support small, medium-sized businesses that are taking on very risky things to advance their technology and to do innovative things. And obviously, it's really important that everyone at the Council take that into account in the way we run things that we're entrusted to do, and also that we live that every day. I think it's regrettable. Obviously, there's circumstances here that are definitely a challenge, but we'll take full measure of all the observations and take those into account in the way we do business, and obviously fulfill what the government's asked us to do, which is to restore trust in this area of programming and get it up and running as fast as we possibly can.
I listened very carefully, Mr. Davies, to your opening statement, and the hallmark from my perspective is the desire to restore public confidence and trust. It's no small wonder, it's going to be a large feat to accomplish, but it's no small wonder you state that, because after 9 years of Justin Trudeau and his government, one of the most ethically challenged and corrupt governments this country has ever seen, millions of Canadians are skeptical when they hear senior civil servants uttering words that trust us. We're going to restore confidence in the program. We're going to restore the oversight that should have been there in the first place. This arm's length corporation, SDTC, was responsible for essentially doling out free money to the tune of almost $393 million to companies that were conflicted. It's no small wonder that the Assistant Deputy Minister of ISED uttered the phrase, "It was free money." This is almost a sponsorship scandal level kind of giveaway. Public confidence is shattered with the ability of this government to distribute taxpayer monies in a prudent and ethical manner. So if I understand you correctly, the current SDTC organization is under the umbrella of NRC, correct?
Mr. Chair, it is not.
It is not?
No.
They are with IRAP?
Mr. Chair, the SDTC still exists as a foundation. It has an interim board. Its employees are still employees of the foundation.
Right.
They're not part of the NRC.
Okay. So who's supervising, who's providing that daily supervision and monitoring of granting monies to these startup green companies? Who is doing that?
Mr. Chair, I believe Paul Booth was here on a previous testimony. He's one of the interim board members, I believe the chair. So the interim board is supervising as the board of SDTC the activities.
So we have one chair and we have two directors doing all the supervision.
So
is that correct?
As I understand, sir, Mr. Chair, there are three interim board members and then the management of SDTC.
Okay.
that run the organization at this time.
All right. So they are providing the oversight on behalf of the federal government. Is that correct?
And Mr. Chair, there's also, as I understand it, there's a contribution agreement.
I understand that.
Between the department
So
and the
NRC
organization
is
and
not
also the-
providing any oversight
Once we have taken on responsibility for the program.
at the moment.
As
NRC
it
is
stands
not
now.
providing oversight, correct?
Mr. Chair, I would say that's accurate, yes.
And
we're doing
IRAP
it.
is not providing oversight.
We'll be involved once the transition's taken place.
Okay. Well, according to the minister, in his statement on June 4th, 2024, he talks about essentially the NRC providing a level of oversight. The actions were rooted in our commitment to transparency, accountability, upholding the highest standards of integrity, says the minister. As Government of Canada organization, the NRC is subject to rigorous and stringent oversight of its personnel and finances. This structure will help rebuild public trust while increasing accountability, transparency, and integrity. So he's actually misled Canadians in believing that you're providing that extra layer of transparency and accountability, which is the furthest from the truth. That's not happening right now. You're going to move towards that in 2026, but money is being channeled right now by one board chair and 3 board members and the current SDTC organization, because no one was fired. The existing board of SDTC either resigned in shame or resigned after public pressure. The current board chair found guilty of 2 ethical violations by the ethics commissioner. All of the directors resigned in shame. So what confidence can Canadians have moving forward that between now and 2024 and 2026, when the new corporation takes over, that there's any accountability, any transparency? How are Canadians supposed to feel confidence, sir, after hearing my exchange with you right now? What confidence can you give them?
So, Mr. Chair, just a clarification, the transfer that will be undertaken will be done within this year. And we would hope if we can do that earlier, we will do so. The second is prior testimony has been given here from the department and SDTC, the interim board member who was here, that spoke about the process they're undertaking, and they've accepted the Auditor General's findings, and actually they're reviewing all the files with that in mind. And that interim board was put in place, I think, obviously because of the importance of public trust and the need to establish leadership at SDTC right now to do that work, and to do that work before it's transferred to the NRC in the coming year. So certainly also that transfer will take place hopefully in the 4th quarter of this fiscal year, and we're endeavoring to make that happen. But in the interim, obviously, the testimony that's been provided here before by the department and the interim board has talked about them accepting those recommendations and taking that fully into account in the review they're doing right now.
Thank you.
So I'll leave them to speak to how they're operating.
Very much. Bring it out to Ms. Kelly. Do you have the floor?
And, you know, our opposition members have been talking about the transition and the lack of oversight. So once this, you had mentioned that the transition is in process right now and will occur within the year. What does that mean for Canadians? If you can help us understand what that transition will do ultimately in terms of increasing oversight.
So, Mr. Chair, I think the transition, of course, will mean that the stakeholders that look to SDTC now will have an ongoing opportunity to work with NRC IRAP to be able to assess support and provide support for their important projects, which is obviously a goal from an economy point of view and also from an environmental point of view. I think the other aspect that I think is critical is people will be able to understand that it's taking place inside a departmental corporation, subject to oversight at various levels. The Auditor General has jurisdiction over us to come and audit our activities. We have an audit committee. We assess risk across the organization. There's strong processes of internal control, financial management, all of which under the Financial Administration Act, all of that applies to us. In a way it may not apply to an arm's length foundation set up under its own statute and its own with its own requirements. So I think there's a very different world in terms of all the rigor and structure that's in place, and that we can provide on an ongoing basis to support the delivery of the program.
Turning now to Mr. Genuis, joining us from his porch. Over to you, sir.
Thanks.
It looks very comfortable.
Thank you, Chair. It's not that comfortable, but it is a beautiful day in Alberta and the beautiful riding of Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan. And I wanted to maybe just zero in on a quick sort of summary of the Green Slush Fund scandal that we're adjudicating today at the Public Accounts Committee. So you have a fund that is giving money to companies ostensibly related to green technology, but you have in reality board members handing out this money, giving it to companies that they own. You have a group of well-connected insiders who have been placed on this board who are saying, okay, let's give a bit of money to Bob's company over here, Bill's company over there. Oh, my company could use some money too. That is the essence of this scandal. In some cases, you had directors stepping out of the room for those votes that benefited their companies. But in some cases, you also had individuals voting on disbursements that directly benefited companies they own. And it's crazy to me and to many Canadians that this sort of thing could happen. But on the other hand, it is part of a pattern of corruption we're seeing under this government over the last 9 years. And the testimony we're hearing today is to suggest that maybe there's been some changes in the way this program operates. But what I'm getting here is that things have not changed substantially, that we are facing the same problems, the same potential problems of corruption and self-dealing. So I want to drill down on that. You have an interim board right now at the Green Slush Fund that is making decisions about where these disbursements go. Do any members of the current interim board have personal investments in companies that have received money, that could receive money in the future, that are seeking money? Do any current members of that interim board have those kinds of investments?
Mr. Chair, it's not a question I'm in any position to address directly. You have to address that to the individuals involved.
I'm sorry, you can't answer that. We're here adjudicating the question of conflict of interest of board members, and I'm asking you, do any of the current members of the interim board have issues of conflict of interest? Well, why can't you answer that, sir?
So, Mr. Chair, the interim board in no way reports to NRC, doesn't fall under any jurisdiction. We have our policy for conflict of interest. Obviously, the appointment process used for those interim board members is what applies to their appointments and any work that was done to review matters of conflict of interest. So I can't speak to it directly from the NRC.
So it's been 9 years. You have board members that are benefiting directly from decisions of the board, sometimes stepping out of the room when those are voted on, sometimes not. And we have, at present, a board where there may or may not be continuing issues of conflict of interest. That underlines the fact that despite all the discussion around this scandal, the government has not fundamentally changed what's happening. Now, the proposed future transition to these decisions being under the auspices of the National Research Council. This committee has studied the problem of public servants themselves owning companies or being involved in companies that have been benefited from government contracts. So can you tell us, sir, with respect to this future proposed transition to the National Research Council, do any National Resource Council employees, NRC, National Research Council employees have investments in companies that received funding through this slush fund, or that could receive that funding?
So, Mr. Chair, in regards to conflict of interest of our employees, it's explicitly clear that they are not to have investments in companies in which with whom they're working. And absolutely that's reviewed when they join us, and it's reviewed on an ongoing basis. And it's quite critical, obviously, given the matter of real conflict of interest that would put them in if they were to do so, let alone any involvement in the past that could have a concern around perceived conflict of interest.
Thank you. In the time I have left, do any ministers, political staff, PCO staff, PMO staff, anybody who could be involved in directing NRC's decisions, would any of them be able to have investments in companies that benefit from disbursements through this Green Slush Fund?
Mr. Chair, I think, as far as how I can answer it is the administration of program at the National Research Council is conducted by our staff. And it's under their professional judgment in the system.
But I think the public would still like to know, and just a yes or no, would PCO employees, political staff in the minister's office, ministers, PMO employees be able to have these kinds of investments benefiting from the slush fund?
Mr. Chair, I can't really speak
yes
to any
no.
given employees that are not under my care or responsibility in their offices, but they don't have anything to do with our administration and decision-making on investments we make of public
Thank you.
funds.
Thank you.
Like
Mr. Genuous, that is the time you will have an opportunity again to revisit this.
In his announcement, the minister said that this move would be done to increase oversight of over the SDTC. Have you reviewed the AG's report, and is this something that the NRC is equipped to do?
So, Mr. Chair, yes, I personally read the recommendations of the report, observations made, the response that's been made as well by SDTC to the report. Given the role we're going to play in the future in this transition, all of those observations are very important. And obviously, the structure of the foundation itself, which was commented on in prior testimony here, it doesn't apply in the case of the NRC. And so that's a very strong distinction in what existed before and what will exist after the transition. But I think the most important area that I'd observe is just the need for ongoing vigilance and solid practice and conflict of interest, even if it's a matter of perception. We have public servants that are professional, full-time working for us, so they're pretty busy, and this is their job to run the programs that are entrusted in their care, but also to make sure that everyone understands that they maintain and conduct themselves in a way that people couldn't question. I think that's very important to us.
Okay, so to that point, can you speak broadly to what the NRC's responsibilities would be overviewing the SDTC?
So, Mr. Chair, our responsibility is to deliver the benefits of the program that the government asks us to deliver. And so in this case, it would in some ways be very similar to the kind of programming we've worked with for over 75 years, which is support innovation and entrepreneurship. And that's a really solid part of the current activities of NRC IRAP, and very much something that's at the heart of what we do. I think the important addition here is also to pursue sustainable development technology for the benefit of those clean technologies for the environment for Canadians, and that's something that we work in that area. We have obviously a research goal and a strategic goal in climate and sustainability, but also we'd have expertise joining us from SDTC to help us adjudicate those files and obviously assess the benefits from a sustainable development point of view. So there'd be really two ways to look at a file and find those that have the most strong attributes that meet the terms and conditions of the program, and that we're happy to conduct business with on an ongoing basis. That'll be our goal, and deliver the benefits of the program that Canadians expect.
So what is expected then of the SDTC in turn as a result of the transition?
Mr. Chair, I think the transition is to conduct this on an expedited basis to bring some stability that's needed to the clean tech sector and the stakeholders in that sector so that we can get back to business. Second, I think it's also important that we take into account there's been employees at SDTC that have been involved in this and looking for certainty in terms of their own careers, and we look forward to making offers to them so they can join our team. And then third, I think the expectation is that the program can carry on with a high level of confidence that it's being done in a manner that's consistent with public objectives and scrutiny in terms of the way we conduct ourselves in delivering the program. So we've actually got a lot of work to do and a full mandate on a number of levels to respond to this situation, and we're happy to be there to do that for Canadians.
And what are the communication channels like between the SDTC's board and members and officials at NRC?
So, Mr. Chair, we have regular meetings with the interim board, particularly Marta Morgan. I think the board member who was here previously sort of talked about how the board has divided up their work. Ms. Morgan is responsible for working with us on the transition. We meet regularly, really to take account of all the lines of activity. There's a lot of work involved in bringing this program into the NRC, and we're well aligned and coordinated with them. And of course, we also await the work that's being done between the department and SDTC on the files and preparing them for transfer. And then we're doing the kinds of work you'd expect on systems and preparing ourselves from an HR point of view to be able to make offers to the employees and get this done as soon as possible.
Beginning our third round, we're going back to Mr. Perkins again for 5 minutes, please, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to begin by sort of a follow-up to my previous questions on this issue of transparency, because you say when it gets the Green Slush Fund gets merged over into IRAP with the governance structure there, that somehow it'll be subject to all the usual FAA, and I presume that means like access to information. But when I go to the SDTC website, you can print off great detail on every single investment they've made going back to 2001, both active and inactive, when it was given, how much was given, who the proponents were, by date. But no such thing exists for IRAP on a public disclosure that I can see. So it looks to me like by folding this in with IRAP, there will actually be less public transparency and accountability to the Green Slush Fund than more. So will you pledge that everything that SDTC does in its new incarnation under your leadership and the leadership of the Minister of Industry will have at least this? It didn't stop the corruption of $390 million of $800 million going to conflicted parties, but at least we could figure it out and parliamentarians could see it. But I don't see that NRC operates that way.
So Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to follow up with the committee to provide the links to all the proactive disclosure that takes place on the investments we make under NRC IRAP. And I think that would hopefully resolve the member's question as to where you can find the information, because it's important. It's a matter of policy that is made public. And I would say similarly, it's equally important for us people to know who we invest in and how much and the names of the companies so Canadians can look at that information. And it's something we've done, we do, and we will continue to do, and that will apply, of course, to any funding under any measures for sustainable development technology that we'll be offering under NRC IRAP. But I'd like to provide that link to the committee so that the folks can see what we do disclose if they haven't came across it before.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. And secondly, IRAP is overseen by a voluntary, I guess, advisory board of 12 people, which I believe are appointed by you, Mr. Lisk. Is that correct?
So we are not, the advisory board that supports IRAP does not have oversight. There's no fiduciary responsibility. All of that rests inside of the NRC and with the government. The purpose of the advisory board is to provide advice to IRAP around programming, program evolution, and developing new policies. So they provide advice. They do not have any oversight.
Do any of the members of the IRAP advisory board do business with SDTC currently?
To my knowledge, no.
Could you double check on that and reconfirm in writing to the clerk, please?
Absolutely.
Also, I would like to understand that I think you said, Mr. Davies, that SDTC would be rolled over by the end of Q4 this year, which for those watching ends on March 31st, to you. But the understanding is that this actually is going to be spun out of the NRC, is it not, including IRAP, to a new Crown Corporation in 2026? So you'll have very little oversight over the time of what it's doing in actuality, unlike what the minister claimed you would be doing. You have no oversight now, and then it's just going to be flipped to another Crown agency once you've got a hold of it.
So, Mr. Chair, the question is about the Canada Innovation Corporation and the plan that in 26-27 fiscal year that corporation would be put in place. There has been a law passed to create the Crown Corporation. It's just not in effect. So it's a policy question of when that happens, and the government said it'll do this in 2026, 27.
Looks to me like the new SDTC is pretty much like the old SDTC because it's being governed by a group of acting people. It'll be given to you, and then it'll be flipped out to another group. So you're an agency in the middle to another government agency with no assurance that it's going to have transparency or that the 82%, the Auditor General reviewed 226 projects, 186 were conflicted. 186 were conflicted, 82%. Doesn't look like anything's changing to me. Just the name, perhaps where it resides.
So Mr. Chair, I don't have responsibility as a department. ISED and Finance Canada have responsibility for the Canada Innovation Corporation and of course the policy behind that with the ministers that they support. I think the question is really to look at that statute and see what similarities or differences there are between it and the foundation that is the subject of this committee's work and study. And obviously I think it was addressed in prior testimony here as well, is that, obviously there's questions of how to set that up and ensure that those sort of, I guess I'd say, initial conditions about governance are sound and proper. And I'd, of course, leave people to observe what they think about the Canada Innovation Corporation in that regard. I think there are differences, at least certainly one is that in the legislation there's a review committee established by the board of that Crown Corp. This isn't in place now, but is provided for, that is separate from the board members, so that decisions would be taken by a review committee rather than the board itself. That was something put in the legislation at the time.
Thank you very much. Ms. Yip.
I'd like to start off by saying let's correct the record. The NRC has extensive experience in the innovation space, and IRAP is a flagship innovation program with over 75 years of experience. I believe that's what you said in your opening statement. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, yes, that is correct. NRC IRAP has been operating for over 75 years and supports close to 10,000 companies with advice and provides close to 3,000 of those companies with financial assistance on an annual basis, depending on the year. But it's a very strong part of the innovation system and quite well known among entrepreneurs as being an important service for them when they're trying to set up their businesses and see them thrive.
Mr. Brock, back to you for 5 minutes, please.
I want to return to Minister Champagne's announcement to Canadians in June of this year, giving the impression that the NRC would provide that oversight sooner than later. But what we learn now is NRC is not going to provide any oversight until the end of Q4, March 31st of 2025. In the interim, it's literally the same old SDTC, just under perhaps a different chair and 3 different directors. Same employees, nothing has changed, funding has started, TAP started to run again in June. So it begs the question, type of oversight that is being exemplified by this government. According to the press release, he indicates that his department, ISED, will enhance oversight and monitoring of funding during the transition period. So, how often is Minister Champagne involved in discussions with the NRC, giving them updates about his observations and supervision of funding? How often are you meeting with him?
Mr. Chair, the NRC, myself, and our employees are not meeting directly with the minister on the topic. We would work with the Department of ISED, and of course we've mentioned also that we're working with SDTC interim board and employees.
So you as the president are not communicating directly with the minister?
On this topic, actively involved on the transition. We're working with all the officials and the individuals that have the
question is, are you talking to the minister?
I haven't spoken to the minister on the file.
Is the minister talking to anyone else at the NRC, to your knowledge?
Mr. Chair, I wouldn't be aware of any contact directly from the minister to other members of my team in terms of this file. No, certainly not.
So you can't even tell Canadians at this point what it means when he says his department will be enhancing oversight and monitoring of funding during the transition period. You can't speak to that because you're not speaking to the minister.
So, Mr. Chair, the Deputy Minister of the Department has appeared here and spoke to what measures they're undertaking.
It's not my
So
question.
It's for the Department to give an account on their work.
Sir, it's my time. Thank you. You are not able to educate Canadians as to what the minister meant by saying he's going to provide enhanced oversight and monitoring of funding. You're not speaking with him, so you don't know what he means by that, do you?
Mr. Chair, as far as what we'll do to run this program when it's transferred to us, I've spoken to that in my testimony.
That's not my question. Simply say yes or no. You don't know what that means. During this transition period, you're not communicating with the minister. You don't know what enhanced monitoring means, do you?
Mr. Chair, the responsibility for the files that SDTC has now rests with the foundation. It has a new board.
Not you. So you can't answer that question.
Well, Mr. Chair,
okay.
the board
he also talked about a reinforced contribution agreement with ISED. We know that the existing contribution agreements were extremely violated to the tune of $390 million going to companies that were simply ineligible or were conflicted. So what is the reinforced contribution agreement?
Mr. Chair, just that would be a question to be addressed to ISED.
Right.
Who has responsibility for the contribution agreement, not with us.
Right. So Canadians are no more the wiser after hearing this testimony today as to what changes Minister Champagne has introduced for over the next 10 months until SDTC comes under your review and ambit at the end of Q4. I guess we're supposed to say, listen to the government. We'll just trust the government that they're going to do best. They're going to learn from their mistakes, and they're going to ensure that they're going to be proper economic stewards of our taxpayer funds. It's a just trust me type of response. You're not in communication with him. Canadians are no longer confident as to how he's complying with reviewing everything that's being funded in the green tech energy sector. We have no idea, do we?
Mr. Chair, I believe at the time this was raised, not sure exactly the date, but funding was suspended. And then a new board has been put in place, and that changes everything at the foundation about who directs
the other question that Canadians have in mind is how are we going to recover that $393 million that was improperly transferred? What do you say to Canadians? What is the process that the government has shared with you as to how we're going to recoup that money?
Mr. Chair, the question of recovery was discussed in a previous testimony. I believe questions were asked of the Deputy Minister, other witnesses that have been here. Those questions are best asked to the department.
To your knowledge, has it started? Has the recovery process started?
Mr. Chair, the NRC isn't involved with the current files of SDTC. I'm not in no position to answer the member's question, sorry.
Well, presumably you're going to be answering these questions at the end of Q4, so you're not talking about it now as to what steps the government is taking to recover taxpayer funds?
So, Mr. Chair, what we anticipate is the files that will be transferred to us will be ones that are in good standing that we can carry forward and continue to administer the agreements that are transferred to us and the relationship with those clients. That's how the process has been structured. So questions as to recovery and so on would be, of course, best addressed to other parties.
Thank you very much.
With regard to both IRAP and STDC, I'm wondering if you could speak to how both programs may interact and complement each other in terms of their impacts in the innovation supply chain, because it does seem to me that there is that level of complementarity.
Chair, I think if you look at the funding that NRC IRAP provides compared to the funding that SDTC has provided, essentially there is a sort of a continuum of support where NRC IRAP would work at an earlier stage and provide a smaller amount of funding at an earlier stage of a company, and then SDTC is providing more funding and obviously working at a subsequent point of the business's evolution. It's not a perfect continuum or linear in any way, and then there would be cases where clients were clients of IRAP are also clients of SDTC. So I think as far as the questions goes, we can certainly see how we can provide a continuum of support within the programming that we'll be offering to clean tech innovators from the earliest stage to later stages in their development and growth.
So when both are merged under the Canadian Innovation Corporation, how do you see this framework supporting innovation and growth in the Canadian economy more writ large?
So, Mr. Chair, of course, the Canada Innovation Corporation and the question of how it would work is something that was subject of a blueprint that was issued by the government some time ago to explain its goals and its objectives, obviously to provide a continuous support to innovators and entrepreneurs. And it would, by virtue of that blueprint, provide support from the earlier stage to later stages where more significant funding might be involved in terms of particular technologies, particular risks, things that are hard to get up off the ground, and where public support will be warranted. And the purposes of the company, or the corporation, the Crown Corporation in that case, will be able to provide a continuum of support to those innovators and entrepreneurs. So in some ways, the bringing in of SDTC into NRC IRAP is sort of a first stage of that kind of system where we start at the early stage, get a relationship with a company, provide support through regular IRAP, but also be able to work with them later on as they grow, and the challenges are increased in terms of scaling those firms up so that they become sustainable businesses.
Thank you. We're now going to begin our fourth and final round, going back to Mr. Genuis, who is no longer on his porch, now appears to be in the House of Commons. Over to you, Garnet, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. The sun was in my eyes. It's very clear that this is the same old SDTC, despite claims about changes. This NDP Liberal government's corrupt green slush fund, loaded with conflict of interest. It hasn't changed because it's still being administered by a board using exactly the same model. And the NRC can't answer questions about basic conflict of interest issues that are ongoing. Now, the constant theme that we have at this committee on various issues here, public accounts, is that when things go wrong, the ministers apparently have nothing to do with it. They always want to describe themselves, and Liberal members want to describe ministers as mere passengers on the ship of state. And I'm sorry to see that likely at the industry file, we have yet another Liberal minister that seems to be more focused on leadership campaign preparations than on governing. I want to ask specifically, Minister Champagne has said, as Mr. Brock talked about, that there would be enhanced monitoring during the interim period and changes to contribution agreements. When the minister said that, was he telling the truth?
Mr. Chair, I think the previous testimony taken here about the interim period and the monitoring, the review of the files, the AG's observations and those being accepted by the department and SDTC are important. They're there on the record to establish how things will proceed.
Just answer the question. I mean, was the minister, who you report to as well ultimately, was that minister telling the truth when he said they were putting in place changes to contribution agreements and enhanced monitoring? Was Minister Champagne telling the truth? Yes or no?
So, Mr. Chair, the minister's actions are there on the record in terms of suspension of funding, putting in place a new interim board and a process to review the recommendations that have been made, particularly the Auditor General's report, and take appropriate action on that, and then subsequently to have it transferred to us.
I'll stop you there. I mean, I asked you the question twice, and you can't tell me clearly that the minister that you report to was telling the truth, which suggests he wasn't. And hopefully we'll have him before this committee so that he can give an answer directly to that, because he made some claims about changes at SDTC that just don't seem to have actually been made at all. Now, I want to ask about bonuses. Have bonuses been paid to executives, directors, managers that have been working on this green slush fund? Are people that are working on this receiving bonuses?
So, Mr. Chair, I'm not in a position to address bonuses of SDTC. or its employees. I think those questions have to be addressed to the organization itself to provide an answer for the members.
Okay,
questions.
but so you're supposed to be taking over administration of it. So should those bonuses be paid? Will you recommend that they not be paid? What's your position on that going forward?
So, Mr. Chair, I think the employment of SDTC employees is subject to their arrangements with the foundation. At the point in time they become NRC employees, then it'll fall under our regime for compensation, and that's a completely separate employer, and obviously we'll count for what we're doing with those employees once they join our organization.
Should they receive bonuses, though?
Mr. Chair, I have no views to share with the committee in terms of the work of SDTC employees and bonuses. That's something you should address to the organization itself.
Okay, I mean, with you taking it over, I would have hoped for a little more on that. But final line of questioning here: would ministers or Liberal political staffers be able to invest in companies that benefit from this green slush fund? Would any have investments? Would any be able to receive those investments?
So, Mr. Chair, without speculating, I think the question is really any of these people that have been mentioned in the question is what conflict of interest procedures apply to their own roles, and I think you'd have to address that to those individuals and in the circumstances. Certainly nothing I can give an account
to. Jump in, but NRC is going to be responsible for giving out this money. So what conflict of interest procedures would apply to dispensing those funds?
Mr. Chair, as I said, the conflict of interest policy of the National Research Council will apply to any program that comes under our care. And certainly in this case, it will apply to the Sustainable Development Technology Programming funding that we will have care of once we've had it transferred.
Have rules that would prevent this kind of conflict of interest, that would prevent political staffers, ministers who own companies from having those companies benefit. Do your rules prevent that? I think it's a simple, clear question, and I'm not getting an answer. Can you give a clear answer? Would your existing policies allow staffers, ministers to benefit? Yes or no?
Mr. Chair, the conflict of interest policy of the NRC and our administration of funds is taken place by professionals. They'll direct funds where there's eligibility and benefits for Canadians, and with the application of our conflict of interest policy to their activities. And we take those decisions within the National Research Council.
Thank you, Mr. Genuous. That is...
Chair, I'd like to raise a point of order.
I'll hear a point of order. Yes, Mr. Genuous.
Thank you, Chair. I think I pretty clearly and repeatedly asked the question that the witness pretty clearly refused to answer despite multiple attempts. I'd like to ask you to put the question to the witness and ask him to inform him of his obligations as a witness. I didn't ask if they had a conflict of interest policy. I asked what the policy is, and witnesses have an obligation to answer clear questions, especially when repeatedly asked over and over again in a clear form.
Thank you, Mr. Junius. I have a point of order as well from Ms. Khalid.
On that same point of order, Chair, I don't think that is a point of order at all, and I don't think that we can force an answer from witnesses.
Well, I do have that ability. Having said that, I am. Mr. Davies is here. He's answering questions. We might not like the answers. I think his non-answers speak for themselves. You will have one other round, the official opposition. You're welcome to press it again. I am going to move on. Ms. Khalid, you have the floor.
And I would like to talk more reasonably than the previous round. So the Canadian Council of Innovators sees the Canada Innovation Corporation as a fundamental shift in approach in supporting innovation and growth, given its focus on commercialization and protecting Canadian IP from leaving our shores. How fundamental is this, in your view, to supporting growth in our country, especially at a time where business investment is low and we're dealing with challenges with respect to productivity?
Mr. Chair, obviously it's critical when we speak about Canadian benefits in the programs that we're talking about administering. It really is in regards to seeing those businesses be able to grow, be able to create IP, be able to see the returns and the benefits of that captured here in Canada for benefits of Canadians and Canadian workers. all that's very critical. And I think seeing those kinds of investments, which are risky, undertaken and supported, and seeing things grow here in Canada is really the ultimate goal of these programs. And it's obviously a critical long-term objective for the economy, and really important, because that's what establishes the life that we all here enjoy in Canada, and establishes kind of productivity performance that we need to have as a country. And many of these initiatives are all aimed at that, including, as was mentioned, the Canada Innovation Corporation. Yes.
Thanks for that. And what would be the impacts on business without programs like SDTC and IRAP? Given that business investment is low, what state would innovation be in our country without government supports like this?
So, Mr. Chair, it's long been looked at as far as the support that's provided from public and different types of programming, whether it's through tax incentives or direct supports, that these are critical, particularly at the early stage of technology development and innovation. This is a place where the risks often outweigh the potential returns, or even the ability to assess those returns. And these programs, I think, are there to ensure that that activity takes place, because if it didn't happen, then we would all be worse off. Each country has an approach to this. Canada has a system of various programs and tax supports and so on, which are all there aimed to help support financing of activities that are obviously going to support growth for the long term, including NRC, IRAP, and of course the SDTC program for its life. And so obviously keeping that programming available to the sector and to the innovators and entrepreneurs is the objective of the current exercise that we're involved in, to bring this transition to a conclusion on a timely basis.
Thank you for that. And I couldn't agree with you more. We need to support these industries in order for Canada to have a say in the world stage. I think it is very important for us to develop and continue to improve these programs to make sure that our industries are improving and that the Canadian economy is growing, because it matters right down to each individual Canadian. Now, the Conservatives are quite hell-bent on undermining program innovators, startups, and small businesses, that really help and support this country. Now, if the Conservatives can so easily go against business interest, their key constituency, why would Canadians ever trust them? And they're so hell-bent on destroying public trust of our public sector. It is, I think, very shameful that they're going to these lengths of really undermining what our public sector stands for, the work that the public sector does to ensure that industry thrives and continues to grow in Canada. That's all the questions I have, Chair.
We heard today that, of course, one of my biggest concerns, and the concerns I often hear from my constituents, is related to the recovery of funds, how funds will be recovered from ineligible projects. Mr. Davies, you did mention to me that there is an ongoing conversation. What is your role in that conversation, and what responsibility do you have in relation to that very important mandate that even the Auditor General cites as credible and important, particularly in my view, to building or rebuilding public trust?
Mr. Chair, the question is on the question of recovery.
Recovery of funds of ineligible recipients.
So our role at this point is that we're not involved in the recovery process or evaluating that. It was, I believe, a topic that was discussed here previously. So I think the questions on that would be best addressed to the department or an SDTC or perhaps both to be able to.
So do you feel you have no role or responsibility in the recovery of these funds, even in the instance where some projects that are currently eligible haven't received funds because of the freezing of the fund that could be eligible under your new program? Wouldn't you say that you have some level of responsibility, or at least should advise SDTC as to the transfer of during the transfer of the program of the process that should be undertaken for the recovery of funds?
So, Mr. Chair, I think without having a final answer as to the structure of the transition, the structure of the transfer of the files, I'm not in a position to say exactly what may or may not apply to any given file.
I understand.
And whether
Mr.
there's
Davies,
an ongoing obligation.
my last comment would be, would you be willing to supply this committee, once you do have that information that you're seeking that would better clarify for us and our committee and our study on behalf of Canadians the process that will be undertaken for the recovery of funds, particularly as it relates to your role as the receiver of this new program and the terms and conditions that may be required or adhered to that would ensure the recovery of taxpayer dollar for ineligible funds. Would you commit to that today?
So, Mr. Chair, to the extent that we have a specific role in respect of recovery, we'd certainly share that with the committee or Canadians generally. And what I won't do is speculate exactly as to how those files will be addressed in the current process that's undergoing review between SDTC and the department. So, but I certainly can say going forward, if we have a role in recovery, then obviously we'll be very transparent about what it is.
Yes, please do. I'm very encouraged by that statement and hope that you could play a role in the recovery on behalf of Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that back and forth. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So along the same lines, the Auditor General, as you know, tabled with this committee further to her audit that $390 million of taxpayer money has been either voted on in a conflict of interest and include $58 million that was given outside of the limits of the contribution agreements or parameters of it. You're going to receive this pile of stuff within 4 to 6 months. And I have no confidence that the Liberal Minister of Industry or his department who screwed all this up will get that $390 million back. Will you commit that if they have not gotten it back, you will follow the Auditor General's report and the comments of the Deputy Minister that this money needs to be recovered and go after that money?
Mr. Chair, I think the question of recovery and the question of how that will be addressed is being established in the transition process. What I assume is that the files we receive will be in good standing. There'll be files that have standing under the contribution agreement that are eligible and that we can carry on our work to provide any ongoing funding that might be well required for those files or to work with those clients. That's the assumption I make.
What does good standing mean? That the money's been recovered and you don't have to do any of the work? Because NRC had a scandal in the Chrétien government where employees were taking kickbacks on grants and NRC had to get that money back. So you do have experience, or the NRC does have experience of trying to recover inappropriate money. More experience than, unfortunately, than the department does. So will you commit that you will get it? Because good standing doesn't mean anything to me.
Mr. Chair, good standing, as I'm defining it, is that they would be eligible, files that are eligible under the program. Obviously, I can say that to the extent that we have a legal role to recover any funds due to the Crown, then, obviously that's something we would follow up on because it would be, within our authority to do so. As we do now, if we ever have funds that are owing as a consequence of programs that we already run. So that's the framework that will
you ensure that the employees, you talked about employee offers, the employees that were involved in putting this forward, including the current acting president who fast-tracked the Visharian Center proposal through SDTC and were involved in this Liberal cover-up corruption, and the Liberals are trying to cover it up, are not offered new positions since they were involved in helping this happen already, as well as any of those corrupt directors that are there.
Mr. Chair, our approach with SDC employees is that we'll be working with the vast majority of employees to provide offers, and the senior executives, the interim board are working with the senior executives on their employment as it is now, and you could address those questions to the interim board as to their relationship with the most senior employees in SDTC.
And will you make any IRAP advisory board member resign who is currently involved with SDTC in order to ensure we don't have the same level of corruption happen under your leadership that's happened under the Liberal leadership of Minister Champagne, that does not continue?
So, Mr. Chair, as I believe my colleague had mentioned, our current IRAP advisory board, to our knowledge, doesn't have anyone that's involved in this topic or circumstances.
I asked if they do, will you make sure they're off the board?
Mr. Chair, we want all of our advisory committee members to be people that, obviously are there and serve in the public trust and maintain the confidence on an ongoing
Means
basis.
not double dipping like 9 directors the Auditor General identified.